Margaret was 43 years old and a war correspondent. For 17 years, she had reported from the most dangerous regions in the world. She had seen death, written about it, photographed it, but nothing had prepared her for those 14 days. When she was kidnapped in Syria, the first 3 days followed classic interrogation techniques. And then something changed. On the 4th day, they brought her a mother and her 10-year-old son. They pointed the gun not Margaret, but at them, and they said, "Choose. One lives, one dies. If you don't choose, both die." Margaret didn't choose. They killed both of them right in front of her eyes. The next day, they brought 2 new people and Margaret didn't choose again. Both died again. So why? Why did they give Margaret this choice, and why didn't Margaret choose? Why did she watch both of them die instead of saving one? When Margaret came to her first session, she was 51 years old. 8 years had passed since Syria. When she sat in the chair across from me, the first thing I noticed was her hands, hidden under the table, clasped together so tightly that her fingertips had turned white. Those hands hadn't reached out 8 years ago. They hadn't pointed at anyone. They hadn't chosen. And since that day, Margaret couldn't look at those hands as if they belonged to her. "Where would you like to start?" I asked. She met my eyes for just a moment before looking away. "From the end," she said, "because if I start from the beginning, I won't leave here alive." In some sessions, my patients healed as they spoke, but some stories never left my mind. Today, I'm going to tell you about one of those lives. If you're listening to this story and you also have things you can't hold inside, share what you're going through and where you're listening from in the comments. I read every comment, I hear every story. If you want to hear about the therapy stories I can't get out of my head, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If this story touched your feelings, you can support me by liking. One day, I'd like to hear your story too. If you want me to share your story in my next video, you can send it to the email address in my profile. Remember, our stories heal a little when they're shared. Margaret sat perfectly still in my office chair. Not the stillness of calm, the stillness of someone who had learned that any movement could be dangerous. Her eyes fixed on a point somewhere behind my left shoulder, not avoiding eye contact, looking through me, as if I wasn't quite real enough to focus on. I've been a psychologist for 22 years. I've sat across from survivors of unspeakable violence, from perpetrators consumed by guilt, from people whose minds had shattered under weights no human should carry. But something about Margaret made me hold my breath. There was a density to her presence, as if the air around her had grown heavier, compressed by the gravity of what she held inside. Her clothes were expensive but wrinkled, as though she'd slept in them. Her dark hair, streaked with gray, was pulled back carelessly. Fine lines mapped her face, not laugh lines, but the kind carved by years of clenching against pain. She looked older than 51. Trauma steals time. It ages us in ways that calendars can't measure. "You said from the end," I repeated gently. "Can you tell me what the end looks like?" Her breathing was shallow, barely visible. A person trying to occupy as little space as possible, as little air as possible. 6 months ago, she finally said, I received a letter. What I observed in Margaret is what we call frozen hypervigilance, a paradoxical state where the body remains on constant high alert, while simultaneously appearing completely still. It's common in survivors of prolonged captivity. The nervous system learns that movement invites punishment, so it adapts, it freezes. But beneath that stillness, every nerve is firing, every muscle is tensed, every sense is straining for the first sign of danger. It's exhausting. Living in a body that never relaxes, never truly rests. 8 years of this would leave anyone hollowed out. "A letter," I said. "From whom?" Margaret's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a tiny movement, but I caught it. Her right hand moved unconsciously to her left wrist, fingers brushing against a thin scar I hadn't noticed before. Whatever this letter contained, her body was already bracing for impact. "From a woman," she said. Her voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. "A woman whose son I killed." The words hung between us like smoke. I kept my expression neutral, my posture open. But inside, something shifted. I understood now why Margaret had started from the end. The end was the only place she could bear to enter the story. "Tell me about this woman," I said. "Her name is Fatima." Margaret's fingers pressed harder against that wrist scar. I saved her life, and I murdered her child, and somehow, 8 years later, she found me. Before I tell you what happened in those 14 days, you need to understand who Margaret was before Syria. Because trauma doesn't land on empty ground, it lands on a life already in progress, and it shatters whatever it finds there. Margaret Harrison had spent 17 years as a war correspondent. She was the journalist who went where others refused to go. Not for glory, not for prizes, but because she believed the world needed to see what was happening in the dark corners it preferred to ignore. Aleppo, Mosul, Raqqa, Kabul, Grozny, Sarajevo. She had documented mass graves, interviewed warlords, photographed children's bodies pulled from rubble. Her work had won awards, changed policies, and kept her awake most nights for nearly 2 decades. Her colleagues called her Iron Maggie. Not because she was cold, those who knew her well said she felt everything too deeply, but because she didn't break. She had been shot at, detained, threatened with death. She had watched colleagues die, and every time she had filed her story, packed her bag and flown to the next crisis. I thought I understood death, she told me during our second session. I'd photographed it, written about it, smelled it. I thought I knew what it was. She laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. I was so arrogant. I was a tourist in other people's tragedies, and I mistook proximity for understanding. She had been married once, in her late 20s. A fellow journalist, someone who understood the life, or thought he did. The marriage lasted 3 years before the job pulled them apart. There were no children. This work isn't compatible with motherhood, she told me. You can't raise a child when half of you is always in some war zone. You can't hold a baby with hands that have touched that much death. In March 2016, Margaret crossed into northern Syria. She was 43 years old. It was supposed to be a short assignment, 3 days, maybe 4. Document the refugee crisis, interview some families, get the story and get out. She never got out. Margaret had constructed her identity around the act of bearing witness. This is common among war correspondents. They find meaning in being the person who looks when others look away. They believe in the power of documentation, the moral weight of truth-telling, the necessity of showing comfortable people the suffering they'd rather not see. But here's what most witnesses don't acknowledge. Watching is still a form of distance. The camera creates a barrier. The notebook creates a barrier. The press badge creates a barrier. These tools separate the observer from the observed, the recorder from the recorded. They allow you to be present in the horror, without being of the horror. For 17 years, Margaret had operated behind these barriers. She had seen death, but she had never been forced to participate in it. She had documented choices, but she had never been forced to make one. Syria took away every barrier she had. It made her not a witness to violence, but an instrument of it. How did they capture you? I asked. Margaret's hands moved for the first time since she'd sat down. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs, anchoring herself to something solid. I noticed her fingernails, bitten to the quick, ragged, the habit of someone who needed to hurt something and had chosen themselves. Checkpoint, she said. A fake checkpoint. They were wearing Syrian army uniforms. Good ones, not cheap knockoffs. Professional. By the time I realized something was wrong, there were already guns pointed at us. Us? My fixer, Khalid. Her voice softened on his name. He'd worked with me for 3 years. He knew the region better than anyone. Hosky had a wife, 2 daughters. The youngest was 8 months old. I'd never met her. He used to show me pictures on his phone. He was so proud. She stopped, swallowed hard enough that I could see her throat move. They shot him before I could process what was happening. No questions, no demands. Just... She made a small gesture with her hand. 1 second he was sitting next to me. The next second he was dead. I heard his body hit the ground outside the car. That sound, like a sack of grain dropped on concrete. I still hear it sometimes when everything else goes quiet. And you? They put a hood over my head. I didn't see daylight for 3 days. I didn't know where I was, who had me, what they wanted. The first 3 days were interrogation, who I worked for, what I knew about military operations, who my sources were. She paused. I'd been trained for this. Media organizations prepare you. I knew how to resist, how to give nothing useful, how to buy time. I thought I was handling it. I thought I was winning. Her voice dropped. Then they stopped asking questions, and that's when I understood. I wasn't a prisoner they wanted information from. I was a prisoner they wanted to destroy. Did they tell you why? I asked. Why you specifically? Margaret's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. There was no warmth in it, only a bitter recognition. Oh, they told me. They were very clear about it. She shifted in her seat, the first real movement I'd seen from her. Do you remember the Raqqa airstrike? June 2014? 6 high-ranking ISIS commanders killed in a single drone strike? I nodded. It had been international news. I wrote that story. I was the one who confirmed their location. I had sources inside, people who trusted me, who believed I could help bring attention to what was happening. I wrote the article. I named names. I described the compound. Her hands had curled into fists on her thighs. 2 weeks later, a drone turned that compound into a crater. You think your article led to the strike? I don't think. I know, they told me. The commander who held me, I called him the quiet one because he never raised his voice. He had photographs, satellite images of the compound before and after, a copy of my article with certain passages highlighted. He said, you killed 6 of our brothers with your words. Now you'll understand what it means to have blood on your hands. This is what made Margaret's case so psychologically complex. She wasn't just a random victim, she had been specifically targeted because of her work. And on some level, her captors weren't wrong. Her journalism had contributed to deaths, not directly, not intentionally, but causally. This created what we call a double bind of guilt. Margaret couldn't fully claim innocence, but she also couldn't accept full responsibility. She had done her job, she had told the truth, and people had died because of it. Now more people would die, and she would be forced to watch, or worse, to choose. On the 4th day, Margaret continued, they came to my cell with a chair, not for interrogation. They placed it in the center of the room and told me to sit, like I was about to watch a performance. She went quiet. I waited. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. In 22 years of practice, I've learned that the spaces between words often hold more truth than the words themselves. They brought in 2 people, a woman, early 30s maybe, and a boy, her son. He was holding her hand so tightly, that grip. Her voice faltered. That's how children hold on when they sense something terrible is coming but don't understand what. The boy was wearing a blue shirt with a cartoon character on it. I don't remember which one. Something about that shirt. It made him so real, so ordinary. Just a child who got dressed that morning, probably complained about breakfast, maybe argued with his mother about something small, not knowing. Margaret's eyes had gone distant, seeing something far away from my office. The quiet one stood behind them. He looked at me with those calm, patient eyes and said, you took 6 of ours. For the next 14 days, you will choose who lives and who dies. 1 choice per day. Choose one, the other dies. Choose neither, both die. These are the rules. Her breath caught. Then he started counting, 30, 29, 28. What went through your mind? I asked. In those 30 seconds? Margaret's hands had started trembling. She pressed them harder against her thighs, trying to still them. Everything and nothing. My mind was screaming. I thought, if I don't participate, if I refuse to play their game, then the blood is on their hands, not mine. I thought then that by not choosing, I was making a moral stand. I was refusing to be their instrument. So you didn't choose? I didn't choose. Her voice had gone flat, emotionless. Dissociation, the mind's way of creating distance from unbearable memory. The countdown reached 0. The quiet one nodded once, and they shot the boy first, in front of his mother. I watched his body fall. I watched her scream. Then they shot her too. She closed her eyes. The quiet one looked at me and said, tomorrow try again. Perhaps you'll learn. And they dragged the bodies out. Margaret's initial choice to not choose was a desperate attempt to preserve her moral identity. She believed that refusing to participate meant refusing responsibility. This is a common psychological defense in impossible situations. The mind constructs a narrative. I am not the one pulling the trigger. I am not the one making the decision, therefore I am not guilty. But here's the cruel truth about the situation she was in. There was no clean option. Not choosing was still a choice. By refusing to point at one person, she was condemning both. The mathematical reality was simple and brutal. Choosing meant one death. Not choosing meant two deaths. Margaret wanted to believe that moral purity was possible in that room. It wasn't. Her captors had designed a perfect trap, one where every action, including inaction, led to death. Day 5, Margaret continued without prompting. The words were coming now like water through a cracked dam. 2 brothers, teenagers, maybe 16 and 17. They looked alike, same eyes, same frightened expression. You didn't choose? I didn't choose. They died holding hands. She swallowed hard. Day 6, an old man and his grandson, maybe 7 years old. The old man kept saying something in Arabic. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the tone. He was praying. I still didn't choose. Day 7. Her composure cracked. I watched her shoulders shake, though no tears came. Sometimes trauma goes so deep the body forgets how to cry. Day 7 was a pregnant woman and her sister. Very pregnant, 8 months, maybe more. The sister kept begging, please at least save the baby. The baby hasn't done anything, please. And I sat there and watched the countdown reach 0. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. 28 people in 7 days. 28 people dead because I wanted to keep my hands clean. By day 7, Margaret was deep in what we called moral injury, a wound to the conscience that occurs when someone fails to prevent, or witnesses actions that transgress their deeply held moral beliefs. Unlike PTSD, which is primarily a fear response, moral injury is a crisis of meaning. It attacks the very foundation of who you believe yourself to be. Margaret had built her identity on bearing witness to injustice. Now she was witnessing injustice and doing nothing to stop it. Worse, she was beginning to understand that her nothing was actually something. It was a choice that doubled the death count every single day. The narrative she'd constructed to protect herself, I'm not responsible if I don't choose, was collapsing under the weight of accumulated bodies. Tell me about the days between, I said, days 8 through 12. Margaret's expression shifted, something darker crossing her features. Day 8 was 2 women, friends, I think, not relatives. They had been traveling together when they were taken. One of them kept trying to convince me to save the other. She has children, she said. I have no one choose me, but I didn't. Margaret's voice hardened. I let them both die because I was still clinging to the fantasy that my passivity made me innocent. Day 9, a father and daughter. The daughter was maybe 18, almost an adult but not quite. The father spent the entire 30 seconds looking at me, not begging, just looking, as if he was trying to memorize my face, as if he wanted to make sure I would never forget his. She laughed bitterly. He succeeded. I see his face every time I close my eyes. Day 10 was the first time I almost broke. They brought in a mother with twin boys, maybe 5 years old, identical. They were holding each other and the mother was trying to stand in front of them both as if her body could somehow shield them. And the quiet one looked at me and said, today is special. You can choose one child, the other dies, or you can refuse, and both children die along with their mother. Margaret's whole body had gone rigid. 3 people. He was giving me the chance to save 2 of them, 1 twin and the mother. All I had to do was point at a 5-year-old and condemn him to death. What did you do? I couldn't speak. My voice wouldn't work. The countdown finished. They shot all 3, the mother first, then the boys. I don't remember the sounds anymore. My mind has edited them out, but I remember the silence afterward. The complete, absolute silence. That night, I tried to kill myself. Margaret's voice was matter-of-fact, the tone people use when they've said something so many times it's lost its power to shock them. I tried to strangle myself with my shirt. I couldn't do it, not because of some survival instinct, because they were watching, always watching. They burst in and stopped me. The quiet one stood over me and said, you don't get to escape, you chose this. Every day you choose not to save 1 person. You choose death for 2. That is your choice, and you will live with it. Margaret's suicide attempt on day 10 reveals the unbearable weight of what she was experiencing. Her captors had constructed a psychological torture chamber that was collapsing her sense of self. Every day she refused to choose. Her defense mechanism, the belief that passivity equaled innocence, became harder to maintain. She was drowning in cognitive dissonance, unable to reconcile her inaction with her self-image as a moral person. The cruelty of preventing her suicide was calculated. They wanted her alive not because they cared about her survival, but because death would have been an escape. They were dismantling her psyche piece by piece, and they needed her conscious for every moment of it. This is the hallmark of sophisticated psychological torture. It doesn't just inflict pain, it ensures the victim is present for every wave of it. Days 11 and 12. Margaret continued. I don't remember them clearly. My mind was shutting down. I know there were people, I know they died, but their faces have merged together into a blur. It's like my brain couldn't store any more death, so it just stopped recording. And then day 13. Margaret nodded slowly. Her eyes had gone distant, fixed on that middle ground between present and past where trauma survivors so often live. Day 13. Something finally broke, or woke up. I'm still not sure which. Maybe they're the same thing. Tell me. She took a breath, the deepest I'd seen from her since we began. They brought in a woman named Fatima, and her 10-year-old son, Yusuf. Fatima was different from the others, Margaret said, her voice softening. She wasn't crying, wasn't begging. She walked into that room like she already knew what was coming, like she'd made some kind of peace with it. Her son, Yusuf, he was terrified, shaking, but she kept her hand on his shoulder, and somehow that touch seemed to calm him. She was protecting him even then, even knowing she couldn't really protect him from anything. Margaret's throat moved as she swallowed. Fatima looked at me, really looked at me, not through me, not past me, but directly into my eyes, and she spoke in English, clear, deliberate English. What did she say? She said, I know what you've been doing. I heard the others talk. You don't choose, and they both die. You think you're being good. You think you're keeping your soul clean. She paused, still looking right at me. You're not. You're just letting them win every day. You give them 2 deaths instead of 1. You call it morality, I call it cowardice. Margaret's hands were shaking badly now. She didn't try to hide it. Then she knelt down and kissed Yusuf on the forehead. She whispered something to him. I couldn't hear what. He started crying, and she stood up, looked at me again and said, choose me. Save my son. Give my boy a chance to live. Please, I'm begging you, choose me. Fatima did something remarkable in that moment. She reframed Margaret's entire understanding of the situation. For 12 days, Margaret had believed that not choosing was the moral option, that passivity equaled innocence. Fatima shattered that illusion with a simple truth. In a situation where death is guaranteed, refusing to minimize harm isn't noble. It's just a different kind of participation. What Fatima offered was also extraordinary. She gave Margaret permission. She transformed the choice from, you kill my son, to you saved me. Same action, different frame. This is the kind of psychological reframe that can break through even the deepest moral paralysis. Fatima understood something Margaret hadn't yet grasped, that in a room with no good options, the only moral path is the one that reduces total suffering. Did you choose? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Margaret's face contorted. For a moment I thought she might finally cry. The muscles around her eyes tightened, her lips pressed together, but no tears came. I pointed at Fatima, she whispered. I said her name out loud, save her. And they did. She paused. Her breath had become shallow and rapid. Do you know what happens when you choose? They make you watch anyway. They made me watch while they shot a 10-year-old boy in the head. I saw the exact moment the light left his eyes. I saw his mother screaming, trying to run to him, being held back. And then they dragged her out, alive. Her voice had gone cold, clinical. The dissociation was back, her mind's only defense against a memory too terrible to hold. I saved her, I condemned her son, and in that moment I actually thought, that I had finally done something good. Day 14. Margaret said, they didn't bring anyone. The quiet one came alone. He sat across from me, the only time he ever sat at my level, and he smiled, the only time I ever saw him smile. What did he say? He said, you understand now. You came here thinking you were different from us, clean, innocent, a watcher, not a doer. But yesterday you pointed at a woman and saved her, which means you pointed at a child and killed him. You're just like us now. You know what it means to choose who lives and who dies. Margaret's jaw tightened. But then he told me something I still hear every night. He said, "We recorded everything, every day, every choice. Every time you sat there and let them die, the world will see what kind of person you really are." "The recordings," I said. "You mentioned videos." "They released me the next day, dumped me at a border crossing with nothing but the clothes I was wearing. I found out later that someone had paid a ransom. I still don't know who. I went home. I tried to rebuild my life. I thought maybe the videos were just a threat, maybe they'd never surface." Her hand moved unconsciously toward her phone. 3 years ago, I found them on the dark web. Someone had uploaded 14 videos, 14 days, 27 deaths, and me sitting in a chair watching or pointing. The videos had comments, thousands of people discussing my choices, debating whether I did the right thing, analyzing my facial expressions. Her voice cracked. "My worst moments, my most shameful moments, playing on an endless loop for strangers to judge." "How did you find them?" I asked. "I wasn't looking for them. A colleague, someone I'd worked with years ago, sent me a message. He said he'd come across something I needed to see. He thought I should know they existed before someone else told me." Margaret's hands clenched. "He was trying to be kind. I know that. But when I watched the first video, when I saw myself sitting in that chair, that blank look on my face while people died in front of me." She stopped. Her breathing had become shallow and rapid. "I watched all 14 in one night. I couldn't stop. It was like watching a car crash happen to someone else, except the someone else was me." And the comments, people had opinions about every choice I made, about whether I was brave or cowardly, about whether they would have done better. Strangers on the internet judging the worst moments of my life like it was a game show. There was one comment I'll never forget. Someone wrote, "She should have chosen every time. One death is better than two. Basic math. Basic math." Margaret's voice cracked, as if pointing at a child and saying, "Kill this one is just arithmetic." The existence of those recordings compounds Margaret's trauma in a devastating way. Trauma survivors often struggle with what we call contaminated memory, the irrational sense that their worst moments are visible to everyone, that people can somehow see the terrible things they've witnessed or done. For Margaret, this wasn't irrational. It was real. Her most vulnerable, degrading moments were literally being watched by thousands of strangers. This creates what we call perpetual exposure. The trauma doesn't stay in the past because it's constantly being reenacted in the present. Every day, someone new might be watching, someone new might be judging. The wound can never fully scab over because it keeps getting torn open by invisible hands. "You've lived with this for 8 years, I said. "What made you seek therapy now?" Margaret reached into her bag and withdrew an envelope. It was worn at the edges, handled many times. She placed it on the table between us but didn't open it. "This," she said, "6 months ago she found me. Fatima. Fatima." Margaret's finger traced the envelope's edge. "She got asylum in the US 3 years ago. She spent 2 years tracking me down and then she sent me this. Have you opened it?" "Many times. There's a photograph inside, Youssef, and on the back 3 words. Margaret's voice dropped. "I remember everything. I let the silence hold. Sometimes the most important thing a therapist can do is simply wait." "I don't know what it means," Margaret whispered. "Is it an accusation? A thank you? Both? Does she remember that I saved her? Or does she remember that I murdered her son? Does she want to forgive me or destroy me?" "There's something else," Margaret said. "Something that happened last week. The reason I'm actually here." I nodded for her to continue. "Fatima sent another letter. Different this time. She wants to meet in person. She lives 40 minutes from here. I didn't even know we were in the same state until she told me. She's been that close this whole time. How do you feel about that?" Margaret laughed, a sharp, jagged sound, terrified, hopeful, sick to my stomach. I said, "Yes, I'm meeting her in 2 weeks." She looked at me with something approaching desperation. "I need to be ready. I need to know what to say. I need..." She stopped, her eyes filled with tears, the first I'd seen from her. "I need to understand how to face the mother of a child I killed. How do you do that? Is there a protocol? A script? Because I've been practicing conversations in my head for 8 years and none of them feel right." Margaret's desperate search for the right thing to say reveals a deep truth about moral injury. It can't be solved with words. There is no script for seeking forgiveness after impossible choices. No formula for explaining the inexplicable. What Margaret really needed wasn't the right words, it was the capacity to sit in the discomfort of not knowing. To meet Fatima without an agenda, without a defense, without a prepared statement, just two people bound together by the worst experience of their lives, finally facing each other. Over the following sessions, Margaret and I did the slow, painful work of preparing for her meeting with Fatima. We didn't rehearse speeches or practice apologies. Instead, we worked on something harder, helping Margaret tolerate uncertainty. What if she hates me? Margaret asked during our third session. She might, I said. How would you hold that? I don't know if I can. You've been holding her potential hatred for 8 years, I pointed out. You've been living as if she hates you, as if the whole world hates you, as if you hate yourself. What would change if it turned out to be true? She considered this for a long moment. At least I'd know, she finally said. At least the waiting would be over. And what if she doesn't hate you? Margaret looked up sharply. This possibility that Fatima might offer something other than condemnation seemed almost more frightening than hatred. Then I'd have to stop hating myself, she whispered. And I don't know how to do that. In our fourth session, we talked about the life Margaret had been living since Syria. She had returned to journalism briefly, desk work, editing, nothing in the field. But even that became too much. The newsroom felt like a minefield. Every story about violence, every image of death, triggered flashbacks. I quit after 6 months, she said. I told them I needed a break. That break has lasted 7.5 years. How do you spend your time now? Carefully. I wake up, I make coffee, I walk around my apartment, I try not to think, I fail, I think about Syria, I think about the faces, I take a pill to sleep, I wake up the next day and do it again. She smiled grimly. It's not a life, it's a holding pattern. I've been waiting for something, permission, punishment, I don't know what, for 8 years. And now Fatima has made contact. The waiting is almost over. That's what terrifies me most. The waiting has been awful, but at least I knew what it was. Whatever comes next, I have no idea how to do it. Maybe that's the point, I suggested. Maybe the only way forward is to stop knowing, to meet Fatima without a script, without a defense, without any certainty about how it will go. Just you and her and the truth between you. Margaret was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. I haven't told you about the night before I came to you, the night I decided to finally get help. Tell me. I was standing on my balcony. I live on the 14th floor. 14, I never noticed the coincidence until that moment. I was looking down and thinking how easy it would be. How quick, how final. And then I thought about Fatima. About how she'd fought so hard to survive, to escape, to build a new life. She'd tracked me down. She'd sent me that photograph. She was still reaching out, even after everything. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. And I thought, if I jump, I'm doing their work for them. They wanted to destroy me and I'd be finishing the job. Fatima survived that room. Her son didn't, but she did because I pointed at her, because I chose. If I erase myself now, I erase that choice too. I make it meaningless. She wiped her eyes. So I stepped back. And the next morning, I called you. Because if Fatima can keep living after what she lost, maybe I can learn to live with what I did. This exchange revealed the core of Margaret's psychological struggle. Self-hatred had become her identity. It was the lens through which she viewed every aspect of her life. And perversely it had become comfortable, familiar, predictable, strangely safe. The possibility of forgiveness threatened to upend everything she believed about herself. If Fatima didn't hate her, if she could be forgiven, then who was she? What would her life mean without the weight of guilt she'd been carrying? This is one of the least understood aspects of trauma recovery. Sometimes survivors resist healing because their wound has become their home. The pain is terrible, but at least it's known. Recovery means venturing into unknown territory, becoming someone new. And that kind of transformation is terrifying in its own right. The session after her meeting with Fatima, Margaret arrived 15 minutes early. She was already sitting in the waiting room when I came to get her. Unusual for someone who typically arrived exactly on time. But something was different. As she walked into my office, I noticed her gait had changed, less rigid. Her hands hung loosely at her sides instead of being clasped protectively in front of her. She moved like someone whose body had remembered, after a long absence, how to exist without constant tension. "Tell me," I said. She sat down, took a breath, and for the first time since I'd met her, Margaret smiled, not a big smile, just a small curve of her lips, but genuine. "We met at a coffee shop," she began, "neutral territory. I got there an hour early because I couldn't sit at home anymore, and then I saw her walk in and I thought I was going to pass out. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. 8 years of nightmares, and there she was, real, solid, walking toward me." "What did she look like?" I asked. "Older than she should be?" "She's maybe 43 now, the same age I was when—" Margaret paused. "She looks like someone who's been carrying something heavy for a very long time. Lines around her eyes, gray in her hair. But her eyes themselves, they were calm. That's what struck me. After everything, she had calm eyes." "Like you," I observed. "You also carry something heavy." "That's what she said." Margaret's voice softened. She sat down across from me and neither of us spoke for what felt like forever. I was preparing my apology. I had a whole speech ready, all the things I'd practiced. But before I could start, she reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. Another one? Different. This was a small garden, flowers, vegetables, a little fountain. She slid it across the table and said, "This is my garden. I planted it for Yusef. Every plant is something he loved or something I imagine he would have loved. It's how I keep him alive." Margaret's eyes glistened. Then she said something I'll carry for the rest of my life. She said, "I didn't come here to forgive you. Forgiveness? That's between you and God or between you and yourself. It's not mine to give or withhold." What did she come for? She said, "I came because you saved my life and I've never thanked you. I came because we're the only two people in the world who really know what happened in that room. I came because I'm tired of carrying this alone, and I think you are too." What Fatima offered wasn't absolution. It was something more nuanced, and in many ways more valuable. She acknowledged the full complexity of their situation. Margaret wasn't simply a villain who killed her son. She wasn't simply a hero who saved her life. She was both simultaneously because the situation had forced her into an impossible dual role. By refusing to position herself as the giver of forgiveness, Fatima actually freed Margaret. She removed the power dynamic that had haunted Margaret's imagination for 8 years, the idea that Fatima held her moral fate in her hands. Instead, she offered something unexpected. Partnership in suffering, two people bound by the same nightmare, finally able to face it together. "What happened next?" I asked. Margaret leaned forward. Her eyes were bright, not with tears this time, but with something that looked almost like wonder. "We talked for 4 hours about Yusef, who he was, what he loved, what kind of man he might have become, about her journey to America, about my years of silence and shame, about the videos and how she found them and how she watched them once and never again. She watched them once, to understand. She said she needed to see what happened, not just know it, but see it. And when she finished, she understood something. What? Margaret's voice dropped to almost a whisper. She said, "I watched your face when you pointed at me. I watched your eyes when they shot him. And I saw something no one else would notice. You didn't look relieved that you'd saved me. You looked destroyed that you had to choose at all. In that moment you lost something too. Maybe not as much as I lost, but something." Margaret wiped her eyes. Then she took my hands, these hands I've hated for 8 years. She held them and she said, "These hands pointed at me and gave me life. I don't know why you chose me instead of maybe don't either, but I'm here because of what these hands did. And I refuse to let them become the enemy." Margaret continued therapy for 6 more months after meeting Fatima. The road wasn't linear. There were setbacks, difficult nights, moments when the old guilt came flooding back. That's how healing works. It's not a light switch. It's more like learning to walk after a devastating injury. Some days you take steps forward, some days you fall. But Margaret kept walking. She and Fatima meet monthly now. For coffee, sometimes lunch. Margaret says it's the strangest friendship she's ever had. "We're connected by the worst thing that ever happened to either of us," she told me. "There's no pretending with her. She knows exactly what I did, and somehow that knowing has become a kind of freedom. Fatima asked Margaret to speak at a foundation that supports survivors of ISIS captivity. Just once at first, Margaret talked about what it means to survive when others didn't. What it means to carry choices no one should have to make. What it means to find connection with someone who has every reason to hate you. Afterward, other survivors approached her, not with blame, with recognition, with relief that finally someone understood. I spent 17 years bearing witness to other people's pain, Margaret told me in our final session. I thought that made me special, brave. But bearing witness from behind a camera is easy, bearing witness to your own darkness. That's the hard part, that's where the real courage is. I asked her what she'd learned from all of this. She thought for a long moment. Then she said, that survival isn't clean, that good people can do terrible things and still be good, that guilt is sometimes just love with nowhere to go, and that the only way through darkness is through, not around, not over, but straight through the middle, with someone who knows the path. She smiled, that small, genuine smile I'd come to recognize. Fatima knows the path, she walked it first, and now we walk it together. Margaret's story defies the simple categories we want to assign to trauma and morality. She wasn't purely a victim, she made choices that led to deaths. She wasn't purely a perpetrator. Those choices were made under duress, in a situation designed to destroy her. She saved a life and ended a life in the same breath. What I learned from Margaret is that healing doesn't require resolving these contradictions, it requires learning to hold them. It means building a life that contains grief and gratitude, guilt and grace, memory and hope, all at once, all the time. Margaret will never stop carrying Yusuf. She shouldn't, but now she carries him alongside something else. The knowledge that his mother sees her not as a monster, but as a fellow survivor. That someone who witnessed her worst moment still chooses connection over condemnation. Not everyone finds this kind of resolution. Not every Fatima offers grace. But everyone deserves the chance to seek it, and sometimes the seeking itself is the healing. I hope this story has helped you see your own life, your own emotions, or the people around you from a different perspective. I hope it has helped you understand yourself and others a little better. I would love to hear from you in the comments, to learn something about you, to understand your story a little more. If you want to share what's inside you, you can write to the email address in my profile. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe. To be notified about the next true life story, you can turn on notifications by clicking the bell icon. Before we end, I want to ask you a few questions. Take a moment to think about them. What do you think about this story? Does Margaret's journey remind you of anything in your own life or in the lives of people you know? If you were in that room, facing the same impossible choice, what would you do? Would you choose knowing you'd have to live with it? Or would you refuse knowing both would die? Do you believe Fatima truly found peace? Can anyone find peace after losing a child in such circumstances? What does peace even mean when the wound is that deep? What would you say to Margaret if you could speak to her? Would you offer comfort, understanding, something else entirely? And finally, have you ever carried guilt for something that wasn't entirely your fault? Something you were forced into by circumstances beyond your control? How do you, or how will you, find your way through it? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Your perspective matters. Your voice matters.